Hello and welcome to the 11th video for the AP lecture series. This one is on ecological succession, and I picked out this nice little cartoon here that shows a nice succession in action. And so ecological succession happens in a couple of different circumstances, and we'll get into them. There's two different types of ecological succession, but essentially you've got a functioning ecosystem, something happens and removes a lot of the organisms from it, like we have over here, and then they are forced to kind of regrow and regenerate. So succession is looking at how does that regeneration happen, and it happens in a pretty well-defined way that is repeatable across the globe. So it doesn't just happen in one single area; it's kind of everywhere. This follows the same trend. So the first type is primary ecological succession, and the key difference that makes this different from secondary is that there is no life already existed here. A lot of it has to do with the soil when we're talking terrestrial primary ecological succession. So the soil is gone, no soil for primary. Something has happened, an event occurred that removed the soil and we're down to the bare rock or the bedrock. This could be things like a landslide, right? If a landslide happens, we lose part of a mountain. The rock that is exposed is bare rock, and so primary succession would occur. It could also happen with a volcanic eruption, right? If volcanic eruption and lava covers the ground and you have fresh bare rock there with nothing that has grown on it before, no soil in that environment, that would be primary ecological succession. This could form, or this could happen in aquatic ecosystems if we're just building a pond, right? A lot of retention ponds around our area here in Jacksonville. And when those ponds are first built, there's no life in those ponds to begin with. And so primary succession takes place. And in primary succession, we see a general trend where once you have that bare rock, you're going to have things start to grow on it, things that don't really need soil like mosses and lichens, things that can kind of grow on the surface of those rocks. As they die, they deposit some nutrients, right? Nutrients they pull out of the air. A lot of these are air plants or out of the water, such as the rain or precipitation. As they die, it slowly forms soil. So this is a very slow process because we don't have any kind of substrate to grow on here. Once the soil develops, then it becomes very similar to secondary succession, where we get grasses and small plants. Eventually, shrubs will start to move in depending on the ecosystem, what the temperature's like, and are there shrubs nearby that can deposit seeds there. Those shrubs would kind of outcompete the grasses. They're a little bit taller, they're a little bit hardier, they can withstand more extremes in temperature and extremes in precipitation. And then eventually we're going to have trees start to grow. They're kind of the last things to move in. And those trees, again, are larger. They take longer to grow. And that's going to be closer to the final stage of primary succession. But the big takeaway here is that there's no life there. There's no soil for primary succession. It's been some sort of disaster or catastrophe that has exposed fresh bedrock. This could also be due to human actions, such as like mining. If we strip mine an area of land, we're exposing bedrock. And one of the big problems with strip mining is erosion following it. There's no plant roots here to hold this rock particles in place, and so that lack of soil prevents anything from growing, and it becomes a long, drawn-out process of erosion, and it's really difficult to become this final stage here. The climax. This is called the climax ecosystem over here because it's kind of the climax, the peak of the ecosystem. That's what it would look like had it not been disturbed in the beginning. The next type is secondary succession. Secondary succession is the reestablishment of a community. So in this case, we do have soil left behind. The most common secondary succession is forest fires. When that forest fire occurs, we call it some sort of disturbance, and the soil remains behind. First thing to appear is known as a pioneer species. It's good to know what the definition is. It's the first thing in succession, in ecological succession, that shows up. Typically going to be very small, low to the ground, but quick to grow plants. Things that disperse really well, like a dandelion right here. This disperses really well via the air currents. So even though all the dandelions in the forest fire might have been burnt, You may have a dandelion float in from a nearby unburnt field, and they would grow very quickly. Eventually, they start to die and are outcompeted by our shrubs and small trees. And so this should sound very similar to primary succession. The big difference is we don't have that step here where we would have formed the soil. So once the shrubs are there, eventually the trees come through. And again, it's called the climax community at the very end. That's the very old growth forest. Climax communities are very diverse. There's a lot of different species typically in a climax community, and they're pretty resistant to any type of change. But so secondary is a reestablishment. Fires are one way that we see secondary succession. This could be also true with leftover farms. Like a leftover farm still has the soil there. If someone abandons it or abandons a logging enterprise, if there's a flood and it wipes out a lot of the organisms, like knocks the trees over, kills the plants, there's still soil there. And so we go through secondary succession. Resilience and inertia are two things to know. So we've got the rainforest right here. The rainforest has a lot of inertia, and inertia is the resistance to a change. So if you think about the word inertia for physics, inertia means the resistance to a change in motion. And you've probably heard Newton's law about inertia, which is an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion unless acted on by an outside force. This tropical rainforest is very resistant to a change. There's a lot of different species. We've got this fern-looking plant here. We've got some really tall skinny tree. There's a vine here. There's all sorts of plants growing on the vine. So all these diverse different organisms, there's a much bigger, thicker tree over here, probably different than this skinny one. All these different organisms make it very resistant to a change. Right? A disease would have a hard time wiping out the rainforest because there's so many different types of plants. Forest fires are going to be very tough to happen because it's such a wet environment. And mudslides and earthquakes and stuff like that aren't going to happen because you've got so many roots to hold the soil together. So a lot of resistance to change. Resilience is how fast it can rebound. And so a rainforest is very slow to rebound. If we clear rainforest for agricultural purposes, like growing beef cows so we can have Big Macs and Whoppers, it's going to take a very, very long time to grow back. These plants are very diverse, slow-growing, specialized to the rainforest environment. If you've changed that and created just a barren field of soil, a lot of those plants can't come back or will not come back without our assistance. This grassland here, this is a temperate grassland. It has a lot of resilience, right? If we burn the grass down, because most of that grass material is stored underground in its roots and it's used to coming back fresh every year after the snow anyways, it'll very quickly bounce back to its climax community, which is just this grassland. The inertia is very, very low up here because it's very easy to destroy the grass, right? One forest fire or one grass fire is going to eliminate all these organisms, but they'll bounce back quickly. So that's the difference between resistance and inertia. Got one last part here to go over, and that's prescribed forest fires. So sometimes we like to cause secondary succession to happen. The reason is this undergrowth here is very susceptible to burning, and if we let it grow too high, right? If this is the growth of the underbrush gets up here, you've got small trees, tall grasses, shrubs, then if lightning strikes or people leave a campfire unattended and a forest fire happens, the fire is going to be strong enough to kill these big trees. And that's called a crown fire, which is the kind that are extremely dangerous. They move quickly. You hear about them on the news in California and out west where people are forced out of their homes because these crown fires are out of control. They burn extremely hot and they move very, very rapidly with the wind. These bottom fires here in the underbrush do not end up damaging the tree at all. In fact, they actually help the trees because they clear out all this burning stuff underneath. And so we used to try to prevent all forest fires, which ended up increasing the amount of crown fires. It was actually a bad thing. So we've prescribed some burns. And this is the way a prescribed forest fire typically works. We've got a natural fire break behind here. This is a stream. It could be a road. It could be a trench dug out by Department of Natural Resource workers. And they'll usually set a head fire and a back fire, and these two fires will advance towards one another, clearing out the underbrush. When they meet in the middle, and they're not really going up the tree. This is going behind the tree. When they meet in the middle, everything around them is already burned, and so there's no way for them to spread again. And so this is a good way to control the area. You can kind of pick how large of a fire you want. You can keep it under your watch, and once it reaches its hottest and its peak, it kind of runs out of fuel and will die out. And so you've cleared out the underbrush then, and you allow new trees to grow, and it just kind of opens up the environment and prevents crown fires, which is the most important part of this. That is ecological succession. So please come in tomorrow with some sort of proof that you watched the video. Typically notes will work well, and be prepared to discuss it in class tomorrow. Thank you for watching.